So I'm here today with attorney Chris Wilms of Hopler, Wilms and Hanna. Chris, how are you doing today?
I'm making it. It's not bad for a Monday.
Fantastic. So, Chris, we been chatting for a few minutes before this started, and quite intrigued a little bit about your practice, what you guys do, and how many folks you have at your firm. One of the things that's quite interesting about your practice is that we've been across the street from each other in terms of practicing law for almost a decade now, right?
Yeah, we're approaching a decade. Yeah.
This has been a little too late in the game for us to do this after a decade. Let's not wait another decade to reconnect. But tell me a little about your practice. What do you guys do over there?
Well, so we started the practice in 2011, and it was the partner Adam that I have now. He started the practice with me straight out of law school, which was frightening, but it was one where we were willing to take a risk together. And so as soon as we got our bar licenses, we had the office open and ready to go. We started out doing a variety of things, pretty much whatever would come in the door, and pretty quickly found our focus. Right now, what he does is he mainly handles high conflict estate-related stuff. So if there's family fighting about assets, or if there's alleged wrongdoing or misuse of money by an elderly person or a person that's being exploited, or if someone's died and then the money's being misused by the people in charge of the estate or the trust, he deals with a lot of that. I deal with a lot of the transactional stuff that happens. So when someone's trying to plan for the possibility of dying or becoming incapacitated, then or someone has died, I deal with a lot of the day-to-day transactional work and trying to plan for that, or dealing with the administration of those affairs after they've passed.
Yeah, we've been, I don't know if the word is fortunate, but we've been very fortunate that we've not had to deal with such drastic conversations in transactional planning. You know, we tend to deal with issues as personal injury attorneys after the fact, where, you know, the smoke is still settling and clearing and people are still coming to terms with it. How do you approach dealing with a family that's planning for the worst? You know, how do you see the difference there?
Well, I will say that there are very few areas of law where people come to see a lawyer because something good has happened, right? Real estate closings would be a good example, right? Someone's bought their first house. Estate planning is sort of a mixture. When someone walks in the door, I never have any idea whether they are coming to see me because they have a baby on the way and they're excited and they want to plan and they want to be proactive about making sure if they die or become incapacitated that child is cared for according to their wishes, and that the money's not received by them at too young of an age. Or I don't know if it's somebody who's coming in who's just been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and it's it's an end of life question, and we're trying to make sure they have their affairs in order before they pass away. I don't know. So sometimes people come in and it's because a good thing has happened, and sometimes it's because a bad thing has happened. So I have to be pretty ready when they walk in to shift gears and have different conversations with people.
So it sounds definitively like there's a different approach for each category of person.
Almost certainly.
Yeah. Tell me about those different approaches. How would you approach something where someone's coming in and they've just had a new baby, they're incredibly ecstatic about this new journey they've started, as opposed to someone that's doing some life planning?
Well, when someone comes in with children, I relate to them a certain way. I have young children of my own. I talk to them one-on-one about the concerns that I have and the experience that I have about what might happen if they passed away while these children were still too young. Usually people come in with some idea, whether from Google or from seminars or what have you. They come in with some idea of what they might want to see happen with their property or with their children, but they don't have an inner working or understanding of how it would play out on the back end if they did pass away. And so we talk about all kinds of things, including backup options, which is something almost no one comes in having considered.
Yeah.
You know, if someone comes in and they say, well, I talked it over with my spouse and we've agreed that my sister's going to get my kid if I pass away. Well, there's a lot that goes into that conversation, but one of the real key things that goes into that is, well, what if your sister's not available, and you need to come up with a backup option? 9 out of 10 times that person will say to me, well, I haven't thought of that, So backup options are a big conversation in our office. And I would say that if there's ever conflict in my conference room, it's over that issue. Your sister's not raising my baby has actually come out once or twice over the years. Yeah. But the gist is, just helping people understand kind of how it plays out and where their kids might go and what might happen to their money and what their options are and how much oversight that they might want over that money. One thing I tell a lot of people in these consultations is, my experience has been that when children lose their parents at a young age, they're going to be different. They're going to reach maturity a different way. And so they may go on a dark path before they find their way. And so leaving an 18-year-old or a 21-year-old with a lot of money or with property, that's going to be troublesome. There's a higher risk than average. I mean, any 18-year-old is a high risk,
Sure.
to give $500,000 or $1 million to.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you take a child who's lost their parents and you give them that kind of money, you're talking about some potentially dark consequences from that. And so we have that conversation and talk about ways to divert that money into to other people that they trust to manage pursuant to certain ascertainable standards, to make sure that the child is cared for, but they don't become a trust fund kid and they don't use the money for things that are against their own interest.
Yeah. So we see almost the identical issue involving motor vehicle accidents where there's been a minor child that's been injured. How do you manage, a minor child who's, 14 years old, has been involved in a catastrophic injury, is going to receive a settlement, and ensure that those funds are going to be managed properly, that the parents don't usurp those funds, don't spend those funds on the day-to-day maintenance of the child's lifestyle. Have you ever been involved in any minor settlement arrangements?
Yeah, so it's usually a collaborative effort. By the time an estate planning attorney gets involved in something like that, the personal injury attorney has usually been involved with the family for years, often
absolutely.
by that point. And so the conversation is usually collaborative with the personal injury attorney and the family to come up with a plan, a distribution plan, and people that should be in charge, to make sure that the child's needs are cared for. And this is most important where there's ongoing medical needs or ongoing psychological needs, where there's going to be continued cost of care. There's going to be perhaps special equipment that's needed. You want to come up with a plan that makes sure that the money's distributed, that it lasts as long as it needs to last. Particularly for care for people that have special needs as a result of the injury or have ongoing disabilities because of it. The other thing to really think about is, even if it's something where it's an injury that will not have those ongoing costs of care, but rather there's a large sum of money coming to a minor, just being able to manage it in a way through trusts or through annuities, or basically coming up with a combination of approaches to make sure that the child gets the money at intervals, not too much at one time, not so much that they're going to be vulnerable to exploitation by those who would do them harm.
Yeah, absolutely. So I imagine you have a fair number of tough conversations with families where you don't believe that someone has the best interests of the child at heart.
Well, I think that there are, in the vast majority of cases, whether it's dealing with a child or dealing with an elderly parent, the family often comes to the table with very different ideas about what's in their best interest. And I would say the majority of the time it's well-meaning. It may not be well thought out.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, but it's well-meaning. And so I would say a lot of our effort has been trying to find resources for people who have a family of people with different opinions about how to deal with either a child or an elderly person, and trying to get them to the table to express themselves and feel heard so that we can reach some sort of common understanding. And so, I am a certified mediator. And so one part of my training is to kind of help people facilitate that conversation. And so I've become actually certified to handle guardianship and estate matters too.
Oh, wow. Nice. Nice. So being a mediator, how does that change your style? Does it affect your style at all and how you approach problems?
Well, there's all kinds of different lawyers out there. There are...
Ain't that the truth?
Yeah. We're not all created equal, right? There are lawyers of all types, shapes, and sizes. And, we get a lot of calls from people who say, well, I really want a bulldog lawyer. I am not that kind of attorney. And so I tell people up front, if you're looking for someone who's going to be a bully in court and aggressive, that's not my style. My style is much more, let's make everyone feel heard. Let's understand the different perspectives. Let's work towards a common understanding. Now, of course, I'm going to advocate for my client's interest. Sure. I'm going to try to express perspectives that will enable my client to get a maximum result in the case. That's not what I'm not saying. I'm selling my client out for the sake of the group.
Yeah, absolutely not.
But what we're talking about is a different approach, a cordial, civil, logical, thought-out approach. Just a side note, I took one of those questionnaires where you determine what kind of career you should be in.
Oh, Briggs.
Myers-Briggs.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, so I took that, and it turns out I'm not actually suited to be an attorney. I'm suited to be a psychologist, which
Interesting.
I think is a large part of why I gravitated towards this field. It's a lot of hand-holding and helping people and empathy and trying to help get. For me, the paperwork is really secondary. It's really about the internal gratification I get from helping people get through a challenging time, dealing with the death of somebody or dealing with a crippling injury. It's something that, it's life changing. You see people go through the grief process. They are never the same. Their personalities often are completely different. Trying to hold people's hands through the court process of dealing with the loss of a person and the transition of those assets, it's a difficult process. And being able to successfully get someone through that relatively unscathed gives me a lot of internal gratification.
Absolutely.
The other piece is the peace of mind people get when we do these plans. I mean, wills and trusts and all that, it's not the most exciting topic at parties. I mean, to be perfectly honest, but it's something where, I have people, especially folks that have diagnoses or poor prognoses, after we get done, a lot of times they just sigh. They sigh relief. They are very, very grateful that they finally have this off their list and it's something they can go to sleep at night and not worry about.
That's a good segue into our next topic or next series of questions. What made you become an attorney?
I wish I could say...
instead of a psychologist, right?
Yeah. Well, I wish I could say that's something I always wanted to do and knew from an early age. I mean, I certainly have colleagues that say, oh, yeah, I've known since, 5th grade when we did a pretend trial that I wanted to be an attorney. It actually was a series of weird circumstances that, I went to college to be pre-med with a pre-med focus, and then I faced the perils of freshman chemistry, and next thing I knew...
biochem or just regular?
Just regular chemistry, though I took a fair number of different chemistries. 4 years later, I ended up with a degree in classical civilizations and said, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with this? I have basically 5 semesters of dirty Latin poetry under my belt, and I'm not sure who's hiring for that kind of expertise. So one thing led to another. I decided law school was probably my best bet, and I ended up in law school and gravitated towards a few different things over the years, tried my hand at a few different things like employment litigation and charitable solicitation licensing. And then I ended up working for an elder law attorney who'd been practicing for 50 years in the Raleigh area, and kind of fell in love with the practice.
Fantastic. Kind of an interesting story. I'm glad to hear someone who has a story similar to mine that isn't about knowing since you were 7 that, when you got into that argument over, who kicked the dog, that I'm going to be an attorney. Since that day, I have the same journey that you did, stumbling around, kind of figuring it out, and then kind of falling into a passion.
I don't know where you're coming from a faith perspective, but I find that sometimes you kind of have to go on a bumpy journey to find your path, and that bumpy journey helps inform your perspective.
Absolutely.
And helps equip you for the things that you're going to be facing on that path.
Are you comfortable talking about your faith?
Sure.
Absolutely. So how's faith played a role in the development of your practice and how you run your practice?
Well, my partner Adam has been a devout Christian his entire life, and he's been very patient with me as I've come on that journey too. And it was only last year when I became baptized, finally accepted Christ, and decided to make that the central focus of who I am and my family and my practice. And so I'm still very early in my journey, but it's one where I'm beginning to let it influence my judgment, and I'm beginning to let it influence how I make decisions on a day-to-day basis, particularly with cases. Good for you.
Mm-hmm. Good for you. Well, look, every journey starts with modest steps, right? And from modest means. I mean, look at Paul. But so let me change directions here for just 1 second. Am I mistaken that you folks have written a book? I think I may have seen something online. I'm not sure if I'm 100% correct about that.
I don't think that anything we've written to date would qualify as a book, but we definitely have a few things on the to-do list this year, and we really would like to publish some books. So
maybe I'm recalling this from a conversation we had when we met after work to grab something to eat. But if you were to write a book, what would that book be about?
Well, I will say that, as part of our practice, as part of our global practice, one of the things that our little firm here in Durham does that might surprise you is we represent some of the largest companies in the world in unemployment appeal hearings.
Wow.
We've got a guy that works with us named Peter Hanna, who joined us just a few years ago, merged his firm with us, and he used to be a judge, administrative judge for the unemployment office. And he has some contracts with some vendors that allow him to represent many of the Fortune 500 companies. And so he handles probably 20 or 30 hearings a week representing companies in unemployment cases. Wow. And so really with that industry, though, I feel like his skill set in how unique it is, would be really better suited to put in writing. I think HR directors at companies and people at small employers, would benefit greatly from his experience and how to navigate through that very complicated process. Yeah,
I've long maintained that I've got a book in me somewhere. I've just got to figure out what it is and what it's about, and then commit the time to writing it. But I too have been in that position where nothing really amounts to a book, but there's definitely something building.
Yeah,
sort of like I'm not sure yet.
Yeah, if anything, maybe the memoirs of all the war stories of dealing with the practice of law in general. Huh?
Absolutely, and I definitely want to come back to that. I don't want to cut some of the war story talk that we may have to have towards the end of this interview. But tell me a little bit about what kind of questions clients should be asking before they come and see you. And if someone's watching this and they're interested in engaging your firm, what would you recommend they prepare for, or what questions would you recommend they have in their mind before they come and sit down in your office?
Well, if they're doing well, first of all, anytime you want to see an attorney, you need to thoroughly vet that person. There are minimum standards to being an attorney, but that does not mean that you're a good attorney. And so there are tons of resources online to look and see what other clients have experienced with respect to an attorney. And there are peer review websites, and there's lots of ways to review an attorney in advance before you come to see them. Even our state bar has a searchable portal where you can look up an attorney and see if they've ever had any discipline against them. I would strongly encourage anybody who's seeking an attorney of any type to start there.
And definitely not end there.
No, right, of course. But then, as far as for me personally, if you're coming to see me and you want to do estate planning, it's a good idea to have a rough idea of what you have. What kinds of accounts do you have? What kinds of assets? What kinds of oddities do you have in your family tree? Are you a nuclear family, or do you have a blended family? Do you have people you don't claim? Are there people who might say that they are a child of yours, but they aren't really, or you're not sure? Things like that are things that an estate planning attorney needs to know on the front end. And it's better to just get it out in the open than to withhold it and let it be a consequence for your family on the back end.
I would dread being the attorney in the room where a husband and wife are having that conversation and something new comes out for the first time. Have you ever had a situation like that happen?
No, not exactly. Usually,
I had a deposition last week where that happened.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's frightening. And
Yeah,
I'm sure it'll happen one day.
Yeah,
and
spouse sitting on the chair in the room as well.
Oh, no.
Absolute nightmare.
Well, if you ever walk in my office and there's a hole in the wall, you'll know it happened for the first time. But I would say that it's better to let me know that stuff on the front end, just because then I can actually help you. I have had cases on the back end where people come out of the woodwork and claim to be heirs, claim to be children. And sometimes they are, and sometimes it would have been really nice for the family to know that ahead of time, because sometimes that results in consequences, unintended consequences.
Sure.
And I will say that, about 30% of my time is spent helping families plan for the eventuality, this very statistically likely possibility of dying. But about 70% of my job is cleaning up the mess when people don't plan.
Wow.
And so I have cases where, years can be added on to the process of transitioning assets because of either poor planning or no planning.
Yeah. Yeah, we see a lot of individuals, not every motor vehicle accident thankfully results in someone passing, but we deal with pretty much catastrophic injuries or wrongful death accidents here at our firm, and you would be shocked, and maybe you wouldn't, at the number of people that don't have any kind of advance directives or any wills or any plans. They get in an accident and then suddenly start thinking about why it's so important. And when we follow up with folks after their case is resolved, probably about half of them still haven't done anything about it. And it never ceases to amaze me how quick the human mind is to forget the terror and the pain of going through a terrible car accident, but also forget that there are consequences for passing away without, having any plans, without having seen an attorney or dealt with any, estate planning.
Well, I'll tell you, the first question I always ask after I shake someone's hand when they come into my conference room is, what made you decide to do this now? Has something happened that's prompted your decision to come into my office? And the answers fit into a few different categories, but one of the most popular responses is, I had a loved one that died. They did not do any planning. It was an absolute disaster, and I want to make sure that does not happen to my family. It's one of the most popular answers I get when someone comes into my office, because it can be absolutely devastating if you don't have a plan in place. There's a default of what happens when someone dies and they don't have planning, but that default is what our legislature has decided should happen. And if no matter which side of the aisle you fall on, I think you can admit that our legislature doesn't always get it right. And there's some very non-intuitive
That's the
things.
understatement of the century.
Right.
You come into my office, you see some holes in the wall from what the legislature has done.
Yeah. So, you talk about, the default of what would happen to your stuff. Sometimes it happens to line up nicely with what it is you might have wanted anyway, but a lot of times it doesn't. It ends up with children owning real estate with former spouses. I mean, it's all kinds of, children from a previous marriage owning property with your new spouse and they've never even met. I mean, there's all kinds of odd stuff that happens in our statutes. There's also a number of things that a spouse has the right to claim that you didn't really plan for ahead of time. There's all kinds of things to consider when you plan, but the default of what happens when you don't is often incredibly tedious and probably not what most people would want.
Yeah, that sounds a little terrifying, to be completely honest. As a non-estate attorney, that actually is not just a little bit terrifying, that's completely terrifying. Makes me want to go pull my will out and double check some stuff. So tell me a little about where you guys plan to see your practice in the next 1, 3, or 5 years.
So we... in the Durham area, in the Triangle area, we are expanding rapidly. We're now up to, I believe, 8 people in the Durham location, and handling a litany of things. Of course, the estate planning and Medicaid planning and probate cases are my primary focus. That's the area of the practice that I handle. And then we've got a second location in Sanford, and I'm originally from there and had some roots there. And so when we decided to expand laterally, that was a natural next market to jump into. So we've been there for a few years now, and that's really just starting to blossom this year and last year. So we're really looking to expand into the Sandhills area. I think we may stay in those 2 markets for a while and just kind of grow that and nurture that. So I think that's going to be sort of the 5 or 10 year plan, is to see what we can do in those 2 markets.
So I've not been to spend any substantive time in Sanford, but where I have been in Sanford is Tobacco Road Golf Course.
Very popular.
Probably the best golf course I've ever played at in North Carolina. It's absolutely fantastic. So,
I'm not a golfer, but I have heard that.
Well, if you ever need someone to go down to Sanford for you, please look me up first. I'd be happy to check that out. So, you've got this plan to grow the firm, expand and saturate some of the markets that you're in currently. How are you planning on measuring success for those firms?
Well, I will say that personally, the success is always measured by satisfaction. With lawyering, you often face the fact that your clients are not going to get the results that they want, right? Anytime you have a contested case, there's going to be 2 people at least involved, and one's going to win and one's going to lose. Sure. Or there's going to be some perception of winning or losing. Yeah. Even if you come to some middle ground, the idea of losing a case but still being satisfied with your lawyer's work, that's a tough standard to achieve as an attorney. And because basically when you hire an attorney, you're looking for a result.
Sure,
And
it's enough to keep you up at nights as an attorney.
Yeah, and if the attorney can't produce that result, still being satisfied with their work says something about the attorney. And so I want to be that kind of lawyer. And if I can have clients that, when we get a good result, they're very happy, but when we don't, at least they understand that I did all I could do for them, and that is reflected in our reputation in the community, then I would say that that's my measure of success.
Fantastic. So flipping that on its head for a second, have you ever been in a relationship with a client where you've not been successful? And if so, why? I know these are getting tougher and tougher by the minute here, Chris.
That's a doozy.
And so obviously, I don't want you to reveal anything that's confidential. But on the whole, what makes interactions with clients less successful for us as a personal injury firm? Unrestrained or unrealistic expectations about an outcome is the kiss of death for a personal injury relationship.
Yeah, and a lot of times that's, I would say that that's a flag that you need to address right at the outset. Sure. Is, giving them something that they can hang their hat on with expectations, and reminding them of that, frequently, especially if they start to make their expectations unreasonable. I think one of the problems of both of our industries, particularly with contested, litigation, is that people that haven't had to go through this before have an interesting perspective. I would call it the exception perspective. When they see on the news that someone had a windfall verdict from a case, I think there was recently a case involving Roundup in California with an exorbitant, jury verdict, that will probably get reduced on appeal, that probably won't make headlines like the original verdict did, that's probably one of, 10 cases this year that'll have a verdict like that. It probably cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to get to. People are informed by the one-off stories that make headlines. Yeah. And so when they come in, they have unreasonable expectations about the value of their case, and they don't really see that the justice system as it currently is really just a grind. It's really a means to pick up the pieces that are left, to try to, I guess, try to recover what you can of your losses, but chances are you'll never be made fully whole from whatever kind of thing that brought you into court to begin with.
It's practicing law definitely produces pessimists, is my opinion. You go into getting your license and you're maybe an optimist or a realist, but at the end of the day, there's just a lot of pessimists that have law degrees. Not saying that your opinion is necessarily pessimistic or just completely realistic, but it's hard not to get. I think that's one of the reasons why lawyers have such a hard time with practicing law and deal with depression and anxiety, is that you're constantly having to bring people down to reality of what the judicial system can actually deliver for them and for their harm that they've suffered. It's tough to have to be the bearer of bad news at every turn. Even when you're delivering good news, it's often bad news wrapped in there as well. It's a tough sell being an attorney from time to time. And not that I'm trying to create a woe is us session, but it's definitely can be a cumbersome experience.
Yeah, so if you're able to navigate that process and have a client who appreciates your work at the end of the day, in spite of all of those obstacles that we face as attorneys, trying to help people hold people's hands and navigate them through this process, I would say that is an excellent measure of success.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me pull the ripcord on this serious talk, and let's shift gears to the part of these conversations that I enjoy vastly more than all the serious lawyer talk, even though that is a ton of fun to chat about. Let's find out a little about who you are and what you do. And this is the part where I can see you shifting the chair, getting nervous already, because you don't know what these questions are and what's coming. But I try to keep them pretty standard so that if you do watch the show, you get a sense of what we're asking about. What right now are you absolutely passionate about?
This is going to sound really cliche, but
Hit me with it.
I have young children right now. I have an 8-year-old boy and a 6-year-old girl, and they are really the center of my life. They impress me daily. My son he's a video gamer and a soccer kid, and he's he's just great. He's just a very thoughtful kid. My daughter is learning to read, and she's exceptional at it. And I call her my little artist. She has way better artistic skills than I've ever had, and I'm trying hard to nurture it. So really, anytime I'm not dealing with a client or managing a law firm, that's usually what's on my mind and what I'm dealing with. Fantastic. And what I'm loving.
So, are you a gamer yourself?
Well, when you have to do a biography when you're speaking at an event or when you're teaching a continuing education class or something, and they want your biography, and you feel like you want to put something personal in there. You ever feel like there's things that you put in there that are socially acceptable, and then things that you don't. Video gaming is one of those things. I'm like, I really wish it was more socially acceptable to discuss, because frankly, I have a local group, a small group right now. We're working on expanding. We get together once a week for a couple hours a week. We play World of Warcraft.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and because of its lack of social acceptance, on our work calendars, it's listed as bowling night, and that's actually the name of the guild. It's bowling night, so it's become a sort of a long-standing joke. But I like to do that. I play a little bit.
Tell me about your character. I'm a huge gamer. I mean, I'm not going to be ashamed to admit it. Okay. I'm a nut for gaming.
So I play a horde character, and it's an undead priest.
Yep.
And I watched a commercial. I was on vacation a while back, and I saw a commercial from a lawyer, and I think it was Lowell the Hammer Stanley.
Yeah, up in Virginia.
Yeah, Virginia. Yeah,
good guy.
Yeah, and he's like screaming at the TV screen or at the camera, and I thought, man, I should have I'm a little jealous of this guy and his appeal.
His commercials are a riot.
Yeah, I said I think I have hammer envy. So that's the name of my character, Hammer Envy.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah, look me up.
So Lowell is a riot. That guy, he says that his nickname, the Hammer, came from when he was a baby. When in utero, used to kick his mom, and they gave him the nickname the Hammer.
In utero, and it stuck. I had no idea.
His parents, his family still calls him the Hammer. I believe his parents may have passed, but super nice guys in Virginia. And his videos, if you've not watched all of them, they just get better and better and better. But he is a huge personality. I always thought I had a big personality until I met some folks in the personal injury world. But that guy's a riot. So World of Warcraft, great game. Do you do any console gaming? PlayStation, Xbox?
Mainly to appease my son, but not really.
Gotcha. No. What do you usually play with him?
We play a little Minecraft, a little Call of Duty sometimes when Mom's not around. He's taken up Fortnite lately, and I'm troubled.
Like everybody.
Yeah, I'm a little troubled by that one, but I think he's getting away from it finally.
Good.
He plays a lot of Roblox, I think it's called.
Yep.
Yeah, that's getting real popular with young kids. Yeah, he's playing that lately.
Yeah, I've got very young kids. I've got a 2-year-old and a 7-month-old, but I've got a ton of nieces and nephews, and they're all between basically 6 and 18, and they've all been in the gaming and come out of the gaming and got back in all the various levels. But I'm a bit of a game nut myself, so it's never bothered me, and it's always a good time to get on there and take them around. And I got into to the various different games, even at different ages, like Minecraft. Never enjoyed it, but if you're playing it with your nieces and nephews, it's a good way to bond. So definitely enjoyed that. So family sounds like a big deal to you.
Yeah. So I actually live in Fuquay.
Okay. And, wow, that's a long haul to Durham every day.
Yeah, it's not too bad with the toll road, but I used to live local to Durham, but decided I wanted a little more space, and so I moved to Fuquay, got an acre, and brick house with a pool, and that's where we spend our summers. Basically, I'm very much a stay-at-home kind of guy. I sort of recharge I'm a very extreme introvert, so I recharge my batteries at home a lot. A lot of Netflix and sitting at the house and relaxing. So having a pool and that sort of thing, during the summers, it's been amazing the past couple of years since we've moved out there.
Yeah, no, that sounds like heaven on earth. So what are you curious about? What are you trying to learn a little more about that you don't know a ton about, but you're definitely interested?
Professionally?
Personally, professionally, doesn't matter. Floor's yours.
Well, professionally, I'm really trying to deal with more elder law, trying to really expand into more complex elder law stuff. And the reason for that is I think practically there's a need for it.
Yeah.
There's 70 million baby boomers that are going to need long-term care, and there's very complicated rules.
They're only getting older.
Yeah, very complicated rules, very complicated way of navigating to find resources. So I'm really trying to get, I think, being in my mid-30s, being sort of with a successful firm in the area, at this point, I'm really well postured to jump into that, and so that's really my long-term goal is to get very, very skilled at navigating all aspects of elder law in order to help that population.
So, in light of what you're curious about and what you're passionate about, what are you not very good at?
Personal injury law.
Well, perfect. I happen to have some solutions here. I'm going to slide some business cards to you under the table. Let's get a banner that says that, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, anything that involves injury, I'm sort of I go, ooh, that sounds like it's going to be complicated. Which is funny because you probably say the same thing about what I do. But
exactly.
Yeah,
it's
exactly amazing how the same law degree will get you very, very different people and very, very different skill sets.
Yeah, I've long maintained that personal injury law is the easiest to enter. Like anyone can send a demand package to an insurance company and get them to make an offer, but it is the most difficult to get an adequate recovery in and to navigate the process. I mean, there's a ton of lien and subrogation. There's basically security transactions and interests in the recovery, and it takes a level of sophistication and patience, mostly patience, to go through and navigate, then manage that from start to finish. And every day, the government and the legislature are finding ways to make it more complicated by adding, how we have to deal with Medicaid and Medicare, or ERISA subrogation, or just regular physicians' liens. It's just getting more and more complex. But it really, in my opinion, is super easy to do a really mediocre job at, but really tough to do a good job.
They say a good lawyer handles a case really well, but a great lawyer handles a lot of cases really well. It must be insane. I mean, I could probably find my way and navigate through a case if I absolutely had to.
Sure.
But
I have no doubt.
But the idea of doing that in volume and and having an infrastructure and running a business where you're having to keep up with those kinds of changes and how it impacts all of your active cases and past cases, that's got to be incredibly inundating.
Ton of compliance and checking what's going on with the law, but and seeing whether the Supreme Court of the United States has ruled something on a particular case. A lot of monitoring what's going on and appeals from cases, and constantly having to shift and move the approach, which is why we run our blog the way that we do, trying to share that information with as many people as possible. But at the same time, I'd say the exact same thing about what you do. So it's just a tough industry to be in. It's that commitment that you can't really ever sit down and get lax. You've got to stay on top of everything.
One thing I've been completely reliant on that I feel like all lawyers should have is a circle of colleagues that do what you do and have more experience than you do that you can go to and rely on. I mean, I will say that one thing that's really impressed me about the practice of law has been the resources of getting lawyers together to communicate about what's happening in local jurisdictions at the appellate level. Daily I'm getting inundated with information about, in Florida there's a case with an unfavorable ruling with this kind of provision in a document, and I go, oh, that's helpful that happened this weekend. I end up contacting a client saying, hey, you're supposed to come in 2 weeks to sign a document. I think we were better off changing this language to say this to comply with, some concerns I have about some recent case law. Having resources and people who are sharing that information makes me a better lawyer.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So what do you wish you had known when you hung your shingle? If there's someone that's watching this that is thinking about going to law school or is in law school looking to become an attorney, what would you tell them about the journey, or do you wish that you would have known before you went out there and started working as hard as you are?
I tell you, if I had to go back in time, I probably would have gotten more formal experience with management, finance, accounting.
Exact same way.
I feel like there are so many good lawyers out there that try to start firms and they fail because they're really good lawyers, but they're really bad at running businesses.
Yeah.
That's what I would do. I mean, if I was a new attorney, that's what I would have done, is gone and gotten formal training.
Yeah.
as it stands, I think I feel like I have kind of a knack for it. I had some good resources and people that I could go to with questions, and not to say there haven't been mistakes along the way, but there haven't been any that have cost me the business, and so it's been we've been very fortunate. We've slipped on some good ideas, gotten good advice from good mentors along the way, and managed to have a good combination of skill sets between everybody at the firm that have allowed us to navigate this process without that formal training.
Awesome. So you mentioned when you're not formally in the office and you're not working hard in your day-to-day operations of running a practice, that you spend a lot of time at home watching Netflix. Tell me, what is the last thing you watched on Netflix and why?
I watched the first episode of that Marie Kondo show.
Oh, no. Don't tell me that, Chris. I'm going to judge you.
Oh, really? Well,
did it make you glow with happiness?
Oh, it sparked joy for me.
Sparked joy, that's right.
Sparked joy for me.
Clearly, I haven't seen this.
Yeah, my closet is completely empty now.
Have you started making changes?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, my wife went nuts.
Oh, I'm definitely a purger. I'm definitely a minimalist. And I will say that is probably... That actually relates to my practice of law. We talk about lawyers in suits and ties and going and arguing in court and doing these things that are, professional in nature and looked upon and admired by other people. But the reality is, and I'm sure this applies in your industry, there's a lot of not glorious stuff that we do. And one of the things is I go through people's homes that are hoarders, and I go through and I have to deal with the consequences of living in a home when somebody has age-related cognitive decline, and they
wow.
It's a mess sometimes. And so maybe that has informed, made me more of a minimalist. But, I've definitely been a purger. And so watching that show and kind of inspired me to start doing the same thing. And so, I've got a car full of clothes right now to donate. So
good for you. Good for you. Have you started buying the little containers to put in your drawers to make it stack horizontally? My wife's got all of the kids' drawers sorted out, and it is a nightmare to find anything in the middle of the night when you're changing a diaper.
No, I still have junk drawers, so I've only been through one episode.
Yeah. No, you haven't made the full commitment yet.
No, I haven't binged yet.
That show has been the one thing in my life that has damaged me the most severely off of Netflix. I've seen some weird stuff on Netflix. There's there's horror documentaries. I'm not a big horror guy, but the true life crime stuff where you think, why did I just watch that? But man, that Marie, she has rarely upset the apple cart of my house. She really has.
Well, my other Netflix binging favorite is Star Trek. I watch a lot of Star Trek on Netflix.
What Star Trek?
All of them.
Oh man.
Oh yeah, I just circle through them, and when I finish the last one, I start over again.
Yeah, that's very interesting because I love Star Trek, but I'm a Stargate nut. SG-1.
Oh, really?
Every year I go through and I watch all 11 seasons and all 4 feature-length movies every year. And it's just this tradition that I started a long time ago, back when I was an undergrad. And I don't sit there and actively watch it. That's a lot of TV, but I will sit there and I'll work on a memo for a judge while it's playing in the background. And but yeah, I'm a sci-fi nut. Every which way I can get it, I'll look for it. Well, anyway, let's move on. And the most difficult question that we've got is up next, and this is a doozy, Chris. And I want you to take as much or as little time as you need. Well, let me ask you this: Do you want the last question to be a softball underhand pitch, or do you want a straight up knuckleball? It's up to you.
I'm ready.
You want the hard one.
Yeah, hit me with the hard stuff.
So, final question before we sign off and see how we can find a way to get you to connect with everyone by giving some information. Tell us about something that you think that is true that almost nobody agrees with you on. So it could be a conspiracy theory that you believe is true that no one else would agree with you on. Do you believe that people in Hollywood are reptile people? What is it that you think is true that no one else agrees with you on? This is a doozy.
Oh, I wasn't ready for that one.
Oh, no, it's out of left field as well. We've had some crazy answers to this. And some of them we've even had to cut because they've been a little too extreme and outrageous.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I better temper it then. Let's see.
Oh, that's totally up to you whether you temper it or not.
I think that this is going to be very politically charged, but I feel like it needs to be. Gun laws. I feel like it is a mistake to meet in the middle on gun laws. People talk about, I think that's the main cause of the problems in this country with gun-related injuries and accidents and shootings is that we have met in the middle. So we have restrictions on guns, but we don't apply it. We don't apply it across the board. So, like, you can't have a gun in a school, for example, right? I think we ought to have one extreme or the other, and I don't know which is better or which is right, right? Either everybody needs to have full freedom to carry weapons in order to protect everybody from everything,
sure,
or we need to restrict it altogether. And
Interesting.
I don't know the right answer, but I feel like these opposing, while most things that are political, right, we can find some common ground and meet in the middle on, and it's better for everybody. I think meeting in the middle on that issue is harmful to everybody.
That is so interesting. How did you get there? What's the thought process that got you? Because that meets the very definition of something that is true to you, that you believe in, that almost nobody agrees with.
Well,
intriguing.
I keep seeing both extreme views being put out on social media, and I'm realizing that they're both right. They keep talking about how the harm caused by certain rules or certain lack of rules is causing harm, and they're both right. And I'm realizing it's because of the fact that they have come to a middle ground on where guns can be, who can have them, having certain regulations related to when you can carry them and when you can't. I think just all of that. I'm not. I may own a gun, but I'm not. A big gun proponent, or I'm not a person who is necessarily anti-gun either. I'm very middle of the road about it. I'm like, to each his own, but.
This is not an each their own solution.
Right.
It's interesting.
Yeah, it's one where I feel like you either need to protect everybody if we're all going to be allowed to carry guns, or you should consider a full, broad spectrum ban on guns where you're being where it's the other extreme, basically. Yeah.
So, do you think that your function as a mediator has led you to this position? Because it sounds just like what I'd imagine a mediator would say. It's like, look, I mean, there are solutions where you can split the baby King Solomon style, but there are very many solutions where, like the King Solomon example, biblically speaking, that one or the other is the better option. Splitting the baby really destroys the baby.
Yeah, and so that's where you have to kind of have a conversation about, which is better and why. And if you're going to make concessions to satisfy the other side, are they concessions that are going to, on the whole, cause more harm? Because are you going to be cutting the foot off the baby, so to speak? Yeah, possibly.
Absolutely. So, Chris, where can people reach you? Where can people find more about you and your firm? This is your chance to give your sales pitch and do some shilling about who you guys are.
Well, so we're conveniently located in 2 locations.
I will admit this is a very convenient location.
Yeah, very, very, sometimes hard to find, but very great service. So we're on South Miami Boulevard in Durham, near the intersection of T.W. Alexander and South Miami. And we also have a location in Sanford, right on South Horner Boulevard, about a block from the courthouse. The best way to get in touch with us is through our website, which is hoplerwilms.com, H-O-P as in Paul, L-E-R-W-I-L-M as in Mary, S as in Sam.com. And that has both of our locations, phone numbers, online contact information, lots of helpful information, free guides for people who are trying to navigate some of the issues that we face on a daily basis.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, Chris, before we sign off, anything that I should have asked that I didn't?
No, I think you covered it all.
You know what? I've genuinely enjoyed chatting to you. It's been my pleasure getting to know you a little bit better, even though we've been neighbors practicing law for quite some time across the street from each other. But I hope that we get to know each other a little bit better and watch our practices grow together. But it's been a pleasure chatting to you today. And I really appreciate the genuineness that you and the answer to that one question, that doozy that I threw at you, I think was probably the best answer I've heard on the show so far. Yeah.
Wow. All
it was genuinely, well, I don't know if you watched a lot of our episodes and that you knew this one was coming, but
I did not.
No, but you did a great job.
I'm gonna have to check out the other episodes to say.
There's been some good answers, but I think nothing as well thought out as that. You clearly have put some time and effort into it, so kudos to you. But again, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you today, and hopefully have the chance to do this again in the future.
Likewise, this is long overdue. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely.